Welcome, listeners. My name is Myrna Haskell. I'm executive editor of Sanctuary Magazine. This is an online publication for women that empowers and inspires with a focus on the arts, humanitarian pursuits, health and wellness, inspirational travel, career, and finance. You can find us at sanctuary-magazine.com. This morning, you're listening to our virtual program, Hot Topic, and my guests this morning are Dr. Sherry Kelly and Caitlin Kelly, co-founders of Positivity Teens. Welcome, ladies.
Great to be here.
Good to see you.
Good morning.
I'm so excited to have you too. We had you last year during the same time. Sanctuary has their 7th annual Focus on Youth issue out this August. And so I wanted to mention that Caitlin has a Q&A with us this month, and she's right on the homepage. So you can find that Q&A concerning the impact of social media on today's youth. And you did a fabulous job there, Caitlin, for us. Thank you so much. And many of you probably recognize Sherry because she's been involved with the magazine in numerous different types of things. She's written articles for us. She's been an expert in our interactive Ask an Expert section. She's been on several of these virtual programs with me, including Coffee and Conversation. And we did a 2-part hot topic, on Alzheimer's, which I know many of you will remember because that was really, truly informative. So I'm so excited to have the two of you. And I want to let listeners know that our topic today, though, are common concerns of teens across the globe. So I want to start by talking about, you guys have had many workshops and you've talked to hundreds of teens, parents, and educators concerning teen issues. Are there common fears and stresses for teens, not just in the United States, but also elsewhere that you've noticed?
Oh, yes, 100%. One of the biggest worries or fears that I've seen from a lot of not only people that we've talked to, but also my peers, is this fear of, what does success look like for me? Will I succeed in a world that has changed so quickly and so fast, especially due to COVID recently? And also just, what do I need to do to reach that point of success is really, really hard to figure out. And also success is there's a different definition of success for everybody. And so it's hard to follow a set of rules or points like you would in a classroom to do an assignment or something like that. It's not, oh, I do these steps and I will succeed. It's very, you have to be very fluid. And so that's something that's hard for a lot of teenagers to do.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, is that, the world's changed so much. And young people today have to be very flexible. They're gonna be actually forced to change their directions as the world changes. And along with that, I think their perception of success has changed to be more about happiness and balance, not just making money or getting a great job or going to a great university. There now is a shift on what success means to young people compared to a generation ago.
That's a positive, right? I would see that as that piece to it, that they're looking at things rather than just money and success, but they're looking at happiness and what's truly important to their spirit and their whole person, right?
Yes.
So that's a good thing that came out of it. I was hoping we could dig into COVID a little bit, though, because I know, and Sherry and I, Caitlin, had also talked about this, in terms of from a mother's perspective or from our generation's perspective. But we have been hearing and seeing that the COVID pandemic has super influenced young people in many different ways, negative ways. And the fact that, teens and those in their early 20s, their peer group is so important, and being in groups and being able to socialize. And then they had that whole, virtual learning. They couldn't have physical contact with their peers. And then it was hybrid and all of these changes constantly. So I was hoping we could dig in a little bit to how the pandemic, which we're through the height of it, but we still have these unknowns, right? How this is affecting the young people.
Yes, 100%. I think one of the biggest fears that I've heard overall is definitely this fear of another shutdown happening in our lifetime. It's harder to go into things now as wholeheartedly as we once were able to before, especially as young kids. I think we like to dive into things and really explore quickly and see how we can grow in a certain area. But that has become very, very hard for us to do, to kind of let ourselves go and explore, whether that's academically or physically or whatever that may be, because we're worrying about this looming pandemic that might impede our goals again, which is really, really difficult to deal with. It's something that I personally have to deal with every day, pretty much worrying about, especially going into college. That's something that worries me is, am I going to have more experiences that I think are vital to the chapters of your life? And, you know, you want to share these special moments with your kids in the future when you're a parent. So it's hard to take that into account too, to know that, you know, you're going to have maybe some more really, really important moments in your life taken away from you. It's
Yeah,
really hard.
another shutdown, another variant. When I work with young people, I'm hearing from people in their teens through their 20s, they've really lost key social developmental experiences for 2 years. You know, so, you know, our recent class of 22 graduates, their last normal year was when they were freshmen.
I know.
All right, so if we're talking about a college grad, the last time they had a normal year was when they were a freshman in college.
And that was a transition year.
Yes, so
That has a whole number of things going with it too, right? You're just learning the new environment, the new curriculum, the new everything, the new people that you're in classes with. Yeah.
so you know, these are young people that have had 2 years of social emotional development, basically now sidelined. They've lost a lot. They've lost, you know, communication skills. They've lost career prep skills. They've lost the ability to build relationships with each other. The whole relationship scene is different now since COVID, and how people meet. The ability to, you know, prepare for the workplace was, you know, derailed. So there were a lot of components involved in the challenges that they're having emotionally and also in terms of their career prep.
And, you know, I just want to mention this week, Sarah Reyes is one of our gifted emerging artists that we have in the issue this month. And she did a short film, and one of the questions that I had for her was about this same issue, you know, how COVID affected her generation. And she talked a little bit about the feeling that those who were in charge and, you know, the people, I don't want to say adults, because, you know, Caitlin is an adult, and we're talking also about the, say, 18 to 25 age group here as well. But the people who have been around a little bit longer, that were in charge of things and making the rules, didn't know what was going on. And so there was that whole sort of haphazard rule changing. Nobody seemed to, like, you know, get their thumb on it and say, here's what's going to happen. And so that feeling of who knows, nobody knows what's going on, nobody's in charge. And, you know, that feeling has to be frightening, I think, for a younger generation as well. Is that true, Caitlin?
Yeah, 100%. And I'd say that I think the first time that the pandemic really started, nobody could really predict the magnitude of what was going to happen, kind of like what you just said,
Right.
for what life was going to look like for the next 2 years. And there's kind of no time to really worry about it, because at least for me, I was immediately thrown into this situation of having to stay home and having all of my things back at school. And so there was there was no time to kind of worry about that. We just had to readjust so quickly. Whereas I think this time, if something was to happen again, now we're kind of in that time now where we have time to worry about, okay, what's it going to look like next time? Because none of us had really experienced this before.
Yeah. Yeah. And Sherry, I think as a mom too, you know, that's the piece that I missed, because my kids were out of school. So as a parent, I didn't have to be dealing with the fallout with my kids with what they were experiencing. So do you want to say anything about that, the parent piece?
Yeah, I'm a parent and a psychologist, so I speak to a lot of other parents as well. I think for us, there's a sadness for our kids, and some anxiety for our kids because we actually lived through what they were going through because most kids came home if they were away at school, or most kids were studying from home if they were at a local school. So we witnessed it. So there's positives to that also, that you got to spend more time in basically a gift of a year with your child, which works out really well if you're in a good relationship. But for people that have a strained family life, it was very, very difficult to endure that, and presented some real challenges. But I wanted to just jump on a point you were making earlier and ask Caitlin to join in. Also, one of the reasons why there was so much emotional distress associated with COVID was because we shifted, or we had to shift primarily their focus, from an internal locus of control. And it became an external locus of control, meaning before COVID, they were encouraged and we fostered them to have an internal locus of control and self-efficacy, a belief that they can take control of their lives, that they have power over their lives, that they can determine their future, that they have choice in their life, they can determine what they want to focus on, and that they're in control of their happiness and their ability to function well in the world. Well, during COVID, that was taken away from them, and they no longer had that sense of control over their lives. They really didn't. They had to obey a set of rules that was constantly changing or evolving, and a reality that was determined for them by other people in charge.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think you can speak to that frustration.
Yeah, and a bigger piece of that too is there were just so many things changing. But there was one thing that for me remained unchanged, and that was the exceedingly high expectations that I was given from my superiors, whether that be teachers or even coaches, like trying to figure out what we were going to do if we got to go back on campus, parents. And so that was something hard as well, because the expectations were stagnant. They were kind of at the same point that they would be in a normal life, but everything else that helps us succeed was changed right in front of our eyes.
That's right. That's an excellent point, because everyone else, all of those folks living and breathing through this, who were already out of school where you're constantly being evaluated, right? With a number, with a grade against somebody else, they were all breaking down. I mean, our whole society was having problems and, issues with this. Obviously, it was terrible. But you folks, your age group, had to still keep performing and getting your grades and getting your numbers and showing that you were going to be who you were before this terrible pandemic came about. So that's something you experienced that many of the rest of us didn't. And so, yeah, I think, and Sherry, you're, as a psychologist, I know you're looking into, the post research and everything that's been done so far with this. But I'm thinking that, let's say more 5-10 years out, that we're going to be seeing things that happen to Caitlin's age group that we really are not even grasping yet. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
there's going to be long-term effects from this, particularly for young people. And we're seeing this already. If you look at a study that was published and completed by the CDC in 2021, the rate of depression, especially among girls, doubled.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. So when we're talking about all these things, folks, what about the future? Are you noticing, because I know that you've done workshops all over. So I mentioned before, all over the United States, you've also done workshops for those abroad. Is there an expectation that's similar to young people here in the United States, that's the same with folks in Europe or, all across the world, in terms of what they expect to see in the future? Is it positive? Is it a negative? Is it a combination? What are their future expectations?
I think, well, we've had the opportunity and the honor to be involved working with Ukraine. And this is a very interesting situation in Europe, not only in the country of Ukraine itself, but other European countries where there are a lot of refugees from Ukraine. So the young people in Europe are experiencing the post-pandemic life very differently than we are,
Okay.
because the current crisis in Ukraine is really impacting them. With the Ukrainian students, some are there in the country, some are out and going to school or going to work in other countries, and it is the uncertainty that is like another weapon of this war being used against them. Uncertainty about how long this will last, uncertainty about where the next strike's going to happen, uncertainty about where they're going to live, because many of them are in temporary housing, not having a place to go back, and they want that very much. They want to go back home.
Oh, I
So,
just honestly, I can't imagine.
No,
I
yeah,
especially,
can't imagine.
yeah, because they, already had, they're what some of the young people have shared with us is that their COVID restrictions weren't as significant as ours in the US or in Asia, but this has just prolonged it now. So they're going to have years of this, and I think a lot will depend on how they're coping. What kind of support they have, and what kind of goals they have for their future.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that. I know, Sherry, that you've been doing a lot of work over in Ukraine, and it's so important because the mental health of those folks over there, young and old. I mean, yeah, one disaster after the next, and now they're displaced. And it's really heartbreaking for people who feel like they can't do anything really. But at least you're there helping. So thank you for that.
Yeah, this
Um,
is Caitlin's, heard a lot of this. She's been involved. She's heard a lot of it. And we've talked to psychologists over there about how they're helping people. So I think, what I've always tried to tell my daughter is that it's your attitude is more important than anything that you say. You might not be able to find the right words, but for parents listening or grandparents, your attitude is what your loved ones will remember more than anything you say in particular. So that's an important message, is to stay positive and be optimistic and find the good in situations. And that's been challenging at times, but that's something that we've worked on together.
Yep.
And so, Caitlin, we have this technology, right? And you did an excellent job on your Q&A about social media. And, I think, it goes right to the negative stuff lots of times when we talk about social media in your age group. But there's also positive things as well as negative things. And so for the folks listening who haven't yet been able to read your piece, can you discuss just briefly some of the positive and negative things you've seen through social media with your age group?
Yeah, so some positives are actually, especially during COVID, it was really helpful to stay connected and watch others on social media talk honestly about their struggles throughout the pandemic as well. I think people were beginning to be a lot more transparent, and we're seeing the effects of that today too. On social media, there's a lot more transparency with people struggling in their everyday lives as well as post-COVID. So that's something that I really, really noticed, that is definitely a positive. We're going in the right track with something like that, where you can still look at something passively, but the reaction doesn't have to be a negative one. It can be a positive one. It reminds you that you're not the only one struggling in this post-COVID era that we're living in. And especially after COVID, social media in many ways has helped influence this idea of speaking more openly and honestly about mental health issues in particular, and sharing personal strategies as well for improving mental health. And there's a wide array of resources that are becoming very easily and readily available
That's
for the
what,
teenagers as well, like the stuff that we're doing.
that's why we have, Positivity Teens, and we've partnered also with a media company, a mental health media company in the United Kingdom called Meaningful Paths. We've also partnered with the Mental Wellness Society, that's based in the US, but it's literally all over the world, with experts from every country imaginable, that also provides resources online for understanding how to cope better and, to help manage stress. So I think that is one of the really big gains of social media, that it's able to now meet the demands of the mental wellness seeking patrons around the world.
Yeah, and I'm almost hearing, Caitlin, and you can elaborate just a little bit on this, that there was a shift from look at me and my friends and how I look in this dress to now we're dealing with real life tragedy, and I've had family members that are gone, and this is a terrible situation we're in. And so are you seeing sort of a shift from a more superficial platform to teens and folks in their young 20s talking about more serious issues then?
I am, but I still think that that kind of glamorous showing of your life is still the very, very, very much the prominent thing that you're going to see on social media, especially now that COVID is kind of starting to wind down.
Yeah.
That was one of the negatives that I wanted to speak about as well, was that COVID is still very, very much real. And it's hard sometimes to see people posting about traveling again or seeing friends, or posting from concerts if you're home, especially if you're sick or staying home to protect a family member that's close to you. And so something that I really try to do, and that I've talked about on different webinars, is really trying to still avoid that passive kind of social media interaction where you're caught emotionally responding. Instead, go on YouTube or a TED Talk about something you may be anxious about, or like for me, like going to college. Like I've been watching a ton of going to college videos about advice and things like that. So it's having a positive impact on me. And so I'm not setting myself up to feel hurt, or to have to passively react to something in a negative way, which I think it's the heavy hitter on social media. That's the most prominent thing that you're going.
So ladies, would you like to talk a little bit more about what you've done through Positivity Teens, and if there's maybe one or two particularly inspirational experiences you've had through your workshops?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do in our workshops, that relates to our conversation we just had, is about social media, and that young people, we all do actually, need a social media diet. Okay, so you're not just what you eat, it's what you watch, what you're engaged in. Okay, and monitor what you're doing, what you're putting inside of you. Because there's still a huge amount of fear of missing out, FOMO, that young people have, and so do adults. When you're watching this, eye candy on social media, and a lot of young people's self-worth is determined by it. And if you look at, there was a meta-analysis that came out of Stanford that actually shows a correlation between social media use and low self-esteem in young women. Okay. And along with this is also, trying to make more in-person connections, real connections, talking to people, meeting somewhere in person than just online, just on the internet. I know from, my clients and also from tracking media, which is something I do for workshops, today, how people meet and get together is through social media or online platforms. Dating now is predominantly through online platforms, okay? The shift in like our basic tendency to meet up or to find a partner, somebody we're close to, is oftentimes mediated by a platform, and you're just scrolling, swiping left or swiping right. So, I'll have Caitlin talk more about that.
Yeah, well, that was one of the biggest takeaways I had post-COVID, was that every single one of us takes this in-person interaction for granted, especially when it comes to academic growth or highly dense social interaction that comes in high school or on weekends or on sports games or things like that if you're a teenager or a student. And so for me, I've been really, really trying post-COVID to take a moment to look around me in the moments where I am filled with a lot of people, because I now know that it can be taken away from me in pretty much an instant.
Mm-hmm.
I just look around, especially, if, like, for example, if you're in a packed basement or a stadium or a concert or something like that, sometimes those moments can feel really magical if you just take a moment and look around you.
You're with people.
You're with people, and that's something we have not really had in 2 years.
2 years.
And so I think that
Yeah.
will be too,
Well,
is that people are gonna take more advantage of it.
I think that's one of the commonalities that we found among young people around the world with our workshops online, is that young people miss actually relating to each other in person, but they've now become used to relating via the telephone or the computer.
Yeah.
And that I think we've also gained a greater appreciation for the freedom and the safety we have to be able to do things in person here. Last year we spoke with a large group of students in China, and they were much more isolated and I think less prepared socially to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
And then we spoke with
in normal life too, they're more isolated as well.
And more so, and then the girls in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about their situation?
Oh yeah, well, these poor girls, they can't even walk to school, and so they don't go to school because it's just too unsafe to walk there.
Yeah, the violence is too intense for them to actually physically go to school. So
I'm sorry, Sherry, go ahead.
No, we're learning a lot about people's daily existence around the world, stories that are very impactful and life-changing to us. But these, are stories that you won't see in the media, but you'll see it here with you at Sanctuary. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, ladies, for joining me today. It has truly been a pleasure. I wish we had an hour to talk to you. You'll have to come back again. I truly enjoyed this. And thank you so much. Shout out to Positivity Teens also for sponsoring us for the second year for our special focus on youth issues. So thank you so much.
Learn more at positiveteens.com and
yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'll close as I always do by wishing all of our listeners and our readers good health, happiness, and continued inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us.